The Apocryphon of Skinner, King James Version, Chapter 1. And it came to pass in the reign of Nebuchadnezzar that the master of the teachers of the Jews was Skinner, who is Seymour. And Skinner dwelt with his mother Agnes, for his father was not. And it was told Nebuchadnezzar, saying, Behold, the Jews are smarter and more subtle than he, and therefore will get them up out of the land. And the king sent for Skinner, and spake unto him, saying, Yet 4 days my man Chalmers will come and abide with thee, that he may give me an answer of whether the Jews are to be trusted in the land of Babylon. And he said, Come, I will make him and his men steamed clams, which are an abomination unto the Jews, that they may feast and be merry, and bear good record of the Jews. Then he spake unto the king, telling the place of his house, that Chalmers and his men might there abide. Yet he was sore afraid of Chalmers and his men, and therefore gave he him the name of the wrong place. And it came to pass, after 4 days, that Skinner was sore afraid, for he wist that Chalmers and his men might come against his instruction. Therefore made he clams, and placed them upon his oven, that they might be cooked and fed to Chalmers and his men. And Chalmers and his men departed for the place of Skinner, and they came unto the place they were told. And it was told Chalmers, saying, Lo, the place of Skinner is yet 80 more cubits. Therefore was Chalmers wroth, for that he had been deceived. And Chalmers and his men came unto the place of Skinner, and Chalmers made his presence known, saying, Go to, Seymour, who is Skinner, I am come against thine instruction. And Skinner bowed himself with his face toward the ground unto Chalmers, saying, My lord, if it please thee and thy men, I shall fetch you the steamed clams forthwith. Therefore Skinner entered his kitchen, and lo, his oven burned by fire. Chapter 2. And the Lord appeared unto Skinner, saying, Seymour, I have taken thy clams as a burnt offering, for that thou givest deceive the Babylonians, and made an abomination unto thee, and have not left thee aught of them. And Skinner was sore afraid, saying, How shall I feed my guests? I have no food beside those clams thou hast taken. And he said, Get thee from thy kitchen, and from thy place, and come into the store yet 80 cubits, and buy hamburgers for the Babylonians. With 5 shekels after the shekel of the sanctuary shalt thou buy them, and thou shalt depart from the window of the kitchen, and thereby return, that the Babylonians may not see thee depart or return. And if peradventure Chalmers shall ask thee, Whence come these hamburgers? Thou shalt say, From mine own oven came they, by mine own hand were they cooked. And he said, The idea pleaseth me, yet I feel as though I be Satan in so doing. And he said, Fear not, for thou shalt people est, and Chalmers shall depart and not tarry with thee, and shall bear a good record of the Jews. And Skinner gathered 5 shekels after the shekel of the sanctuary, and placed his light upon the window for he depart, and looked back into the kitchen, and behold, Chalmers stood and looked at him, saying, Seymour, wherefore is thy leg upon thy window? And he said, My lord, thy servant stretcheth him to serve thee with greater vigor. And Chalmers quick a kitchen, and Skinner quick the place, and ran to the store, and bought hamburgers for the Babylonians, and tarried not, and returned unto his place, and returned unto the Babylonians, saying, My lords, I have hamburgers for you. And a servant of Chalmers said, Hamburgers, are not we eating steamed clams? And he said, Nay, I had said steamed hams, for such are as the name of hamburgers is called in my land. Chapter 3. And the servant said, Thou callest the name of hamburgers steamed hams? And Chalmers said, In what land is the name of hamburgers called steamed hams? For I have communed with the Jews, and never have I heard the phrase steamed hams. Yea, is not the eating of swine an abomination unto the Jews? And Skinner said, The land of New York without the city, from the island thereof, that is Manhattan. And he said, Not so, for I was come into Babylon from Utica in that land, and never in all my years have I heard the phrase steamed hams. And he said, Nay, not of Utica, but of Albany. And the men feasted, and were merry. And Chalmers said, Whence come these hamburgers? They are of the sort from the store yet 80 cubits. And Skinner said, As the Lord commanded him, Nay, from mine own oven came they, by mine own hand were they cooked. And the servant said, Thou callest the name of these hams steamed, yet they have the markings as though placed upon an earth. And Skinner was made dumb, and said nothing to answer that. And the men left eating, and were merry, and tarried not, and stood. Chapter 4. And Chalmers stood, and looked upon the kitchen of Skinner, and behold, it burned with fire. And he said, Seymour, thy kitchen is a flame of fire. And Skinner thought, and said, Nay, it is the lights come from the north. And he said, The lights come from the north, and this part of the earth, according to this time of life, at the 10th hour, wholly compassed by thy kitchen. And Skinner thought, and could only say, Yea. And the Lord softened Chalmers' heart, and he bowed himself to the earth unto Skinner, saying, Suffer me, I pray thee, to enter thy kitchen, that I might see the lights come from the north. And the Lord hardened Skinner's heart, and he said, Nay. And Chalmers arose, and tarried not from the place of Skinner, saying, Seymour, I wot not thy fashions, but thou schemest a good ham. And it came to pass, as soon as Chalmers was yet scarce gone out from the presence of Skinner, that Agnes the mother of Skinner cried unto him, saying, Seymour, the house is a flame of fire. As Skinner could not tell her the truth, lest peradventure Chalmers hear him in his deceit. So he could say only, Nay, mother, it is but the lights come from the north. Chapter 5. And the fire grew, and consumed the place of Skinner, and Agnes the mother of Skinner with it. And Skinner wept, and would not be comforted, for his mother was not. Therefore he called the name of that place Megarasholah, for he said, My sorrow springeth therefrom. And Chalmers returned unto the king Nebuchadnezzar, and there did record of the Jews. And the Lord blessed Skinner with 2 wives. The name of the one was Egna, and the name of the other Maud. Now these are the generations of Skinner, from the time he hosted Chalmers and his men. New International Version, Chapter 1. During the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, the teachers of the Jews were headed by Skinner, that is, Seymour. And Skinner was living with his mother Agnes, for his father had died. And Nebuchadnezzar was told, Look, the Jews are too smart and crafty for you, and they will leave the country. And the king sent for Skinner, and told him, 4 days from now, Chalmers will come and spend the night with you on my behalf, to see if the Jews can be trusted in the land of Babylon. And Skinner said, Come, I will make him and his men steamed clams, unclean to the Jews, so they can feast and drink freely, and speak well of the Jews. And he told the king the location of his house, so Chalmers and his men could spend the night there. But he was very much afraid of Chalmers and his men, and therefore gave the king the wrong address. After 4 days, Skinner was very much afraid, for he knew that Chalmers and his men could come despite his best efforts. Therefore he made clams, and placed them upon his oven, so they could be cooked and fed to Chalmers and his men. And Chalmers and his men departed for Skinner's house, and they came to the place Skinner had saved. And Chalmers was told, Skinner's house is another 80 cubits away. And Chalmers was angry that he had been deceived. And Chalmers and his men came to Skinner's house, and Chalmers announced their arrival. He said, Come, Seymour, who is Skinner, I have arrived, despite your directions. And Skinner bowed down to the ground before Chalmers. My lord, if it please you and your men, I will get the steamed clams right away, he said. Therefore Skinner entered his kitchen, and his oven was on fire. Chapter 2. And the Lord appeared to Skinner. Seymour, he said, I have taken your clams as a burnt offering, because you lied to the Babylonians and made an unclean dish. I have not left you anything. And Skinner was very much afraid, and said, How am I going to feed my guests? I have no food besides the clams you took. And the Lord said, Get out of your kitchen, and your house, and go to the store 40 cubits away, and buy hamburgers for the Babylonians. It will cost you 5 shekels according to the sanctuary shekel, and you will leave and come back through the kitchen window, so the Babylonians do not see you leave or come back. And if Chalmers asks you where the hamburgers come from, you will tell him, They came from my oven, they were cupped by thy hand. And Skinner said, The idea is delightful, but also of Satan. And the Lord said, Do not be afraid, for you will be blessed, and Chalmers will leave and not linger with you, and will speak well of the Jews. And Skinner gathered 5 shekels according to the sanctuary shekel, and placed his leg on the window sill to leave, and looked back in the kitchen, and saw Chalmers standing and looking at him. Seymour, Chalmers asked, Why is your leg on the window sill? And Skinner said, My lord, your servant is stretching to serve you better. And Chalmers left the kitchen, and Skinner left the house and ran to the store, and bought hamburgers for the Babylonians, and did not linger, and returned to the house, and returned to the Babylonians. My lords, he said, I have hamburgers for all of you. And a servant of Chalmers said, Hamburgers, what about the steamed clams? And Skinner said, No, I said steamed hams. That is where hamburgers are called where I am from. Chapter 3. And the servant said, You call hamburgers steamed hams? And Chalmers said, Where do they call hamburgers steamed hams? I have eaten with the Jews, and I have never heard the phrase steamed hams. Indeed, is eating pork not unclean to the Jews? And Skinner said, the land of New York outside of the city, away from its island, Manhattan. No, Chalmers said, I came to Babylon from Utica in that land, and in all my life I have never heard the phrase steamed hams. And Skinner said, no, not of Utica, but of Albany. And the men feasted and drank freely. And Chalmers said, where are these hamburgers from? They are like the ones from the store 40 cubits away. And Skinner said, as the Lord commanded him, no, they came from my oven. They were cooked by my hand. And the servant said, you call the hams steamed, but they have markings like they are grilled. And Skinner stood mute, and said nothing to answer that. And the man stopped eating, and were drunk, and did not linger, and stood up. Chapter 4. And Chalmers stood up, and looked at the kitchen of Skinner, and it was on fire. Seymour, he said, your kitchen is on fire. And Skinner thought, and said, no, it is the northern lights. And Chalmers said, the northern lights, in this area of the world, at this time of year, at 4 in the afternoon, entirely surrounded by your kitchen. And Skinner thought, and could only say, yes. And the Lord softened Chalmers' heart, and he bowed to the earth before Skinner. Please let me into your kitchen so I can see the northern lights, he begged. And the Lord hardened Skinner's heart, and he said, no. And Chalmers rose, and did not linger at Skinner's house. Seymour, he said, I do not understand you, but you stew a good ham. After Chalmers had scarcely left Skinner's presence, Agnes, the mother of Skinner, cried out to him. Seymour, she said, the house is on fire. And Skinner could not tell her the truth, because Chalmers could still hear him, so he could only say, no, mother, it is just the northern lights. Chapter 5. And the fire grew, and burnt Skinner's house down, and took Agnes the mother of Skinner with it. And Skinner wept, and refused to be comforted, for his mother was no more. Therefore he called that place Magrash Olah, saying, because my sorrow springs from it. And Chalmers returned to the king Nebuchadnezzar, and spoke well of the Jews. And the Lord blessed Skinner with 2 women, one named Edna and the other Maud. This is the account of Skinner's family line, after the time he hosted Chalmers and his name. The Message. Chapter 1. In the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, the teachers of the Jews were headed by Skinner, who was also called Seymour. And Skinner lived with his mother Agnes, for his father had passed away. And Nebuchadnezzar was told, the Jews are smart and industrious. Keep an eye on them. And the king called Skinner up and told him, in 4 days I'm sending Chalmers and his men to come and spend the night with you, to keep an eye on the Jews in the land of Babylon. And Skinner said, come, I'll make steamed clams, unclean to the Jews, so they can have a feast and speak well of the Jews. And he gave the king his address to give Chalmers and his men. But he was scared of Chalmers and his men, and gave the wrong address and hoped they wouldn't show up. And the 4 days came, and Skinner was still petrified, for he knew that Chalmers and his men could still show up despite his plan. So he made the clams and put them on the oven to feed Chalmers and his men. And Chalmers and his men went to Skinner's house, and they came to the address Skinner gave. And the person living there told Chalmers Skinner's house is 120 feet that way. And Chalmers was angry that he had been lied to. And Chalmers and his men came to Skinner's house, and Chalmers announced their arrival. Well, Seymour, the same as Skinner, he said, I made it, despite your directions. And Skinner bowed to the ground in submission of Chalmers. Masters, he said, please be seated. I will get the steamed clams. And Skinner went in his kitchen, and his oven was on fire. Chapter 2. God appeared to Skinner. Seymour, he said, I have taken your clams as a burnt offering, because he liked the Babylonians and made an unclean dish. I didn't leave you anything. And Skinner was terrified, and said, how am I going to feed my guests? I don't have any food except those clams. And God said, get out of the kitchen and the house, and go to the store 60 feet away, and buy hamburgers for the Babylonians. It'll cost you 5 shekels, using the standard sanctuary shekel of 1/5 of an ounce to the shekel, and you will go through the kitchen window both ways, so the Babylonians don't see you. And if Chalmers asks you where you got the hamburgers, you will tell him they came from my oven in my hand. And Skinner said, the idea is delightful, but also devilish. And God said, don't worry, you'll be blessed, and Chalmers will leave early, and will speak well of the Jews. And Skinner gathered 5 shekels, using the standard sanctuary shekel of 1/5 of an ounce to the shekel, and placed his leg on the windowsill to leave, and looked back in the kitchen, and saw Chalmers standing and looking at him. Seymour, Chalmers asked, why is your leg on the windowsill? And Skinner said, Master, your servant is stretching to serve you better. And Chalmers locked the kitchen, and Skinner locked the house and ran to the store, and bought hamburgers for the Babylonians, and rushed home, and returned to the Babylonians. Masters, he said, I have hamburgers for all of you. And a servant of Chalmers said, Hamburgers, what about the steamed clams? And Skinner said, No, I say steamed hams. That is what hamburgers are called where I am from. Chapter 3. And the servant said, You call hamburgers steamed hams? And Chalmers said, Where do they call hamburger steamed hams? I have eaten with the Jews, and I have never heard the phrase steamed hams. Indeed, isn't eating pork unclean to the Jews? And Skinner said, Upstate New York. No, Chalmers said, I'm from Utica, and I've never heard the phrase steamed hams. And Skinner said, No, not from Utica, more of an Albany expression. And the men feasted and drank freely. And Chalmers said, Where did you get these hamburgers? They're like the one from the store 60 feet away. And Skinner said what God commanded him. No, they came from my oven and my hand. And the servant said, You call the hams steamed, but they look like they're grilled. And Skinner said nothing to that. And the men stopped eating and were drunk and didn't linger and stood up. Chapter 4. And Chalmers stood up and looked at the kitchen of Skinner. Then there was on fire. Seymour, he said, your kitchen is on fire. And Skinner thought and said, No, it's Aurora Borealis. And Chalmers said, Aurora Borealis, in this part of the world, at this time of year, at this time of day, entirely in your kitchen. And Skinner thought and could only say, Yes. And God softened Chalmers' heart, and he bowed in submission to Skinner. Please let me in your kitchen so I can see Aurora Borealis, he begged. And God hardened Skinner's heart, and he said, No. And Chalmers rose and rushed out of Skinner's house. Seymour, he said, I do not understand you, but you steam a good ham. After Chalmers had just left Skinner's presence, Agnes, the mother of Skinner, called out to him. Seymour, she said, the house is on fire. And Skinner could not tell her the truth because Chalmers could still hear him, so he just said, No, mother, it's just the northern lights. Chapter 5. And the fire grew and burnt Skinner's house down, and took Agnes the mother of Skinner with it. And Skinner wept, and refused all solace, for his mother was dead. Therefore he called that place Magrash Olah, spring field, saying, Because my sorrow springs from it. And Chalmers returned to the king Nebuchadnezzar, and spoke well of the Jews. And God blessed Skinner with 2 wives, Edna and Bod. This is Skinner's family tree, after he hosted Chalmers and his name.